Hello, welcome to SUSECON Digital 2021. This is POV 1017 for Hosted Rancher, making Kubernetes even easier. My name is David Noland, and today's agenda, I'll be doing first an introduction, tell you a little bit about Hosted Rancher and a little bit about myself. Then we'll go into problems that customers face with Rancher, and then some of the benefits of hosted Rancher versus a do-it-yourself, basically running Rancher on-prem or in your own cloud account. I'll be going over some high-level architecture of hosted Rancher and a little bit more behind the scenes in terms of how it works in the technology stack and some of the kind of the best practices we follow with hosted Rancher. And then at the end, I have a few references, some URLs that may be useful for you. In terms of the target audience, it's really people who are interested in learning more about hosted Rancher. It's assumed that you already have some familiarity with the Rancher product. Maybe you're an open source user of Rancher. You've looked at our website and kind of checked it out and what it's about. Or possibly you're a paid customer of Rancher and maybe want to learn a little bit more about what hosted Rancher is and how you might be able to benefit from it. If you have no familiarity with Rancher, I'd suggest probably pausing this presentation. Go check out our website, www.rancher.com, and check that out, and then come back and we can talk a little bit more about hosted Rancher. So for our introduction, first, to describe, what hosted Rancher is, it's a fully managed software as a service SaaS of the Rancher control plane, or I guess you could call the Rancher server or the Rancher application. And that's basically Rancher manages multiple clusters that can be in the cloud or on-premise data centers. And hosted Rancher, it's going to be the same user interface, the same API you've been using that you know and love if you're already a Rancher user. It's the same open source software. There's not any proprietary add-ons or anything different about the hosted Rancher that we offer compared to the Rancher that you would run either on-premise or in your own cloud account. A little bit about myself, as I'm mentioned, my name is David Nolan, and I'm the lead architect and manager for hosted Rancher. And I've worked with Rancher, which is now SUSE as of the acquisition in October. And I've been with Rancher and SUSE for 3.5 years. And I've helped build the hosted Rancher solution from the ground up and been there from the beginning. I have over 20 years of experience in DevOps, IT, professional services, software development, kind of across various functional areas, but always very hands-on technical. I did receive my certified Kubernetes administrative certification. It's actually almost been about 3 years ago. I just got an email saying I need to renew. So, and I'm based in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where Rancher was headquartered before the acquisition. And just to go in a little bit of sort of how I've sort of seen the Kubernetes management evolve over time is, and kind of going from left to right here is sort of how things are evolving and how things have kind of gotten to being very hard and difficult and only for experts, and kind of moved to being easier, more user-friendly, and kind of brought Kubernetes to people who are potentially more novice or beginners. But the nice thing is I think things have remained fairly expert-friendly, so the people who really want to dive deep into Kubernetes and all the technical things that it offers. Some of those things are abstracted a little bit, but they aren't completely hidden away from you. So to start sort of on the left there's this, if you search for Kelsey Hightower's Kubernetes the Hard Way, which is on GitHub, he produces a really good guide on how to install Kubernetes without really any tools and basically installing all the various packages you need, setting up all the keys for encryption, and launching all the infrastructure that you need to do that. And his guide is using the Google Compute Engine to do that. And it's a really good guide for learning like all the nuts and bolts and bits and pieces of how to set up a Kubernetes cluster. But it is time consuming to do, and you really have to be an expert to do it. And like managing that cluster going forward is going to be a very difficult task. So kubeadm is kind of a step, pretty nice step up from that. It's a command line tool that lets you build your cluster. You run it and you configure it with various flags, and you can run it on your various virtual machines or bare metal hardware and create a cluster from that. And it has some rudimentary management tools that let you do some upgrades and various other basic tasks. And that's sort of the way a lot of people can get started with Kubernetes. And I remember doing that when I first got started with Kubernetes and creating my first cluster. So along came Rancher, and Rancher was great because it allowed you to also manage multiple clusters. And it had a full user interface for doing this. And it had integration with various cloud providers like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, DigitalOcean. And you can actually come into Rancher and provision clusters on those providers, and as well as integrate with the managed clusters like AKS, EKS, GKE. And it added various third-party application marketplace. Has monitoring, has logging, backups, has all sorts of things that it kind of brings in that lets you manage Kubernetes more effectively. So it makes using Kubernetes easier, and then you don't need a lot of this low-level expertise. You don't need to rely on like CLIs like kubeadm to provision your clusters. So it's a really big step up, I feel, in sort of the evolution. And sort of the next step up from that, and where I'll sort of focus this presentation on, is hosted Rancher. And that's pretty much all the things that Rancher brings. But you don't have to go through like the installation and operation and day one types of things that you normally would. And of course, I'm going to be talking about that more in the presentation. So I first want to touch on like some of the problems I've seen customers face with running Rancher, and this is like running Rancher themselves. So occasionally customers have problems installing Rancher, and Rancher I would say is fairly easy to install, but I think the bigger problem is actually installing it right. And we have an installation where you can run it just as a Docker container. And the problem is it's not a very highly available fault-tolerant way to install Rancher. But we see that because it's such a quick and easy path, we see some customers doing it, and eventually it makes it into production, which is not great. Another problem we've seen quite often is just with upgrade failures, upgrades just completely failing, having problems, and just even customers struggling to keep Rancher up to date. They'll sometimes get several minor versions behind and then try to do a bunch of upgrades all at once, which can lead to complications, or upgrades from really old versions to really new versions that sometimes paths that aren't like fully vetted by our QA team. Other things we've seen is just managing things like the certificates. They'll provision TLS certs that they'll forget to renew, they'll expire. Maybe they'll go with the Let's Encrypt option, and for some reason something will fail there, and the certificates won't work. And then, or the certificates within the cluster that Rancher is running on will expire, and then things just completely break one day. So there's that, and just basically the day-to-day operations, like setting up all the monitoring and alerting. We have integration monitoring and alerting within Rancher, but some customers just don't use it or don't enable it, or they don't use third-party tools to do monitoring and alerting. And that's just dealing with the memory and CPU, disk capacity. People run out of disk space. People, if they install on bare metal or within their data center. Sometimes they have capacity issues with scaling the environment up after they've uh, after they've kind of outgrown uh, Rancher in terms of the capacity that they've kind of scaled up in terms of like the clusters and nodes that Rancher manages. So now I'll go over like the benefits of hosted Rancher versus just the do-it-yourself and running it within your own data center on premise or within your own cloud account. So obviously one of the benefits is just a full worry-free installation. You don't have to install it. You don't have to worry about the upgrades. You don't have to worry about operating system patches. You don't have to worry about any of the maintenance. All that's taken care of in hosted Rancher. And then also the certificate management, the certificates for the underlying cluster, the TLS certificates for the UI and API endpoint, those are all managed by the hosted Rancher team. You don't have to worry about that. Hosted Rancher also offers a 99.9% service level agreement, and that is a service level agreement backed by financial consequences. So if we don't meet that, we will return your money. Also, there's business continuity. We've seen a few customers who they have like a single expert in Rancher who installed it, who maintained it, who's doing all the upgrading, and then they suddenly leave the company. And the company's just scrambling to, okay, how do we replace this guy? How do we manage Rancher? What do we do? So you don't have to worry about that when you use a hosted solution like Hosted Rancher. And then also the total cost of ownership. You don't need that Rancher expert who can upgrade and maintain it. You don't have to have that person on staff. You don't have to provision the infrastructure for it. You don't have to purchase servers and put it in your data center. You don't have to obtain VMs in your cloud account dedicated to running Rancher. We do all that for you, and we generally do it at a cost that's going to be lower than what you would normally pay. So generally, like, it's a pretty good TOC in terms of doing it yourself versus having hosted Rancher. We can generally do it more efficiently and cheaper than you'd be able to do it. And then leveraging best practices. We know all the ins and outs of running Rancher based on that we've built the software ourselves, that we have a lot of feedback and information from our customers, like how they've done it, what's worked well with them, what's not worked well with them, what problems they've had, where they've succeeded and where they've failed. So all those kind of lessons learned from customers running it, from us running it internally, and us like progressively like learning and doing this better and better, and then engineering the product as well to support various best practices. And then world-class support. We have great support in general. And then when you use Hosted Rancher, our Hosted Rancher team and world-class support team really coordinate very closely together to help you solve problems as and when they come up. So because we have control and access to the Rancher control plane, in terms of collecting logs and troubleshooting, we can do that much more efficiently with our hosted Rancher customers than we can with our on-prem or our do-it-yourself customers. So next, I was going to go into sort of the high-level architecture of how hosted Rancher works. So, at a very high level, we have the hosted Rancher service, which is basically a cloud service. And it can manage your on-premise infrastructure or your cloud infrastructure. So it can manage, your RKE clusters, K3S clusters. We now have RKE2. It can manage those clusters, or you can import your clusters from essentially anywhere. And then in terms of like the cloud infrastructure, if you're running EKS, AKS, GKE, if you're running RKE clusters that you've provisioned on any of these providers, it can also be DigitalOcean, IBM Cloud, any of the cloud providers. We can manage the infrastructure as long as they can connect out into hosted Rancher. And in terms of like a little more detail on how the service works, is basically it is is a software as a service, internet-based service. So so your infrastructure, whether it's running in your cloud account or within your data center, will making connections over the internet, over WebSockets, over port 443. We'll make a TLS connection and come in through our load balancer. We have multiple K3s servers that talk to a MySQL backend. And as long as your infrastructure can reach out on 443, we basically tunnel back over the WebSocket connection to manage your infrastructure. So you don't need any incoming ports open to that infrastructure in order for us to manage it for many types of different clusters. If you do want to do more things that are a little more sophisticated, depending on your use cases, for example, if you have we can do authentication integration. Generally, it's done with things like Azure AD or Okta, or things that have a public endpoint. If it's something that's hosted privately, we can do network peering and reach into your infrastructure that way. We can also do we can use our vSphere node drivers and other node drivers to connect directly to your on-premise data center infrastructure, if that's a use case that you have. So that's kind of a high-level overview of how Hosted Rancher works. And then in terms of behind the scenes, I can talk a little bit about the technology stack that we use with Hosted Rancher. So we very much take a infrastructure as code approach, and we heavily leverage Terraform to basically define what the infrastructure should be for Hosted Rancher and for the tenants that are running in it, and use GitHub as well to store and manage that Terraform, and basically to do all of the change control for that. In terms of building our virtual machine images, we use Packer, which is a really great tool for quickly building out those images, and it also does a very good job of pushing us out to the various regions that we deploy in. And we really take the approach of not patching in place. So once we launch our virtual machines, we don't patch those directly, but we'll basically build new images and then roll in new images. So we kind of have this kind of rolling in images concept. So and because we have the high availability set up with multiple instances, we can generally do this without any downtime. So we'll basically roll in new images, and then we'll roll out the old images, and we'll basically scale up our cluster by 1 or 2 VMs, and then once the cluster is stabilized, then we'll remove the old virtual machines out of the cluster. So that'll basically let us roll in new images and basically provide all the latest patches fairly easily. And because it's a Kubernetes cluster, Kubernetes doesn't particularly care whether you have multiple you could have images that aren't identical, and even to the point where you could even have images that aren't even the same operating system, which is kind of cool. Which kind of brings me to the next point, where we're currently using Ubuntu. This was set up back before the acquisition, and so now we're looking at transitioning to SLES. And a nice thing about the way our whole rolling images works is we could potentially run our clusters on a combination of Ubuntu and SLES. It doesn't have to be one or the other, so we can transition. We can have Ubuntu nodes and SLES nodes running in the same Kubernetes cluster without a problem, which is kind of a cool thing with Kubernetes. In terms of what we run for our flavor of Kubernetes, is we are using K3s, which is a Rancher distribution of Kubernetes. It's a lightweight distribution, meaning that it's got a fairly small binary, and it starts pretty fast, and it's fairly easy to manage because it's just like I said, it's a single binary. So you have separate binaries for the Kube API server, for the Kube scheduler, for the Kube controller, for the kubelet or kube proxy. It's all one process, which makes things fairly easy to manage. And it's also using containerd and not Docker, which you probably heard that Docker is it's being deprecated from Kubernetes, although they're going to have a Docker shim that will allow you to still use Kubernetes, I think, beyond when it's deprecated or support is completely removed. But containerd is a little more, I would say, feature-proof than running a Docker-based Kubernetes. And we're also using MySQL backend, and this is a cloud-managed database. So our cloud provider fully managed it in terms of like the backups and being able to do the restores and the upgrades, which is very convenient for us. The same kind of reason why Hosted Rancher is convenient for our Rancher customers is we use a managed database as well. So we don't have to do a lot of the operational management of those databases directly. The environment also is very self-healing at actually two different levels. So because Rancher it's basically like a Kubernetes-based application, and it's deployed as a deployment, which underneath that uses a replica set. And so and then it launches Rancher pods. So the replica set ensures that there are a certain number of pods. And if a Rancher pod does crash or become unresponsive, the replica set will replace it. So without any human interaction. And at another level, our virtual machines are also self-healing. So if a virtual machine crashes, or the Rancher pod that's running on the virtual machine stops responding and isn't replaced within a certain amount of time by the replica set, then our environment will replace the virtual machines for that, and that will also be done without any human interaction as well, which is very nice and allows us to be able to recover from any issues or problems very quickly and generally without us actually having to get we're generally informed by our alerting system that these things are happening, and we'll be on high alert and we'll come in and make sure that these things go well. But generally we don't actually have to do anything in terms of when these things occur. For our CI/CD, we're using drone, which basically when we're making changes to our infrastructure as code, when we're changing our Terraform, those are committed into GitHub, we're making pull requests, drone will run those on a test environment, make sure those work and deploy properly. And then we'll, once that goes well on staging, then we eventually roll it out into production during maintenance windows. We also use Rancher to manage the Kubernetes clusters for our customers. So our customers will get a Kubernetes cluster with Rancher running on that, and that in turn is managed by another Rancher installation. So we're kind of using Rancher to manage these clusters and also deploy the Rancher apps through the Rancher catalog onto Rancher. So it's sort of one of the ways that we're trying to sort of eat our own dog food and use our own products. So Rancher can manage multiple clusters, and we're using that to manage the various clusters that we have that run Rancher for our customers. And another kind of eat your own dog food is we're using the built-in integration of Prometheus for monitoring and for alerting. And yep, so that's a little bit about our technology stack and how sort of things work behind the scenes with Hosted Rancher. So references. So I have a list of references here. If you want to find out more about Hosted Rancher, we have a website, or if you just navigate to rancher.com and go to the products navigation, there's a dropdown for Hosted Rancher. We have an architecture white paper, which goes into a little more detail in terms of our architecture, how we do security, how we do some of the network peering that I talked about, and some of the kind of the general best practices that I went over. And then we also have a few blogs. We kind of have a kind of introductory blog that first announced Hosted Rancher which is back in, I believe, of April of last year. So it's been about a year now. And then we have another blog that kind of goes over reasons why you'd want to use Hosted Rancher, which I think are more or less covered also in this presentation. So that's it for this session. I want to thank everyone for attending. I hope you're having a great SUSECON digital experience. Again, my name is David Nolan. You can contact me at david.nolan@suse.com. And thanks again. Bye.